You're standing in a courtroom. The judge is reading a number. 150 years. Your lawyer puts his hand on your shoulder. You don't feel it. You're doing math. You're 70 years old. 150 plus 70. You will die in this building. Not today, but in a building exactly like this one. A federal medical center in Butner, North Carolina. Found on April 14th, 2021, at 82 years old. Kidneys failed. The lie finally finished what it started. Behind you, someone is crying. You don't turn around. You stopped turning around years ago. 3 hours ago, your face was on the cover of Forbes. Last week, a Holocaust survivor named Elie Wiesel shook your hand and thanked you for managing his foundation's $15 million. He called you God. You are not God. You are the biggest thief in American history. But let's go back. Before the suits. Before the penthouse. Before the $65 billion. Let's go back to Queens. To a modest house in Laurelton. To a father who fixed pipes for a living. You are 14 years old, and you are already paying attention to the wrong things. You are born on April 29th, 1938. Queens, New York. Laurelton neighborhood. Your father Ralph is a plumber. Your mother Sylvia keeps the house. Or so she tells people. The truth is messier. Your parents dabble in finance on the side. Your mother registers a broker-dealer firm called Gibraltar Securities out of your family home address. The SEC shuts it down. Paperwork not filed. Reports missing. There is a tax lien on the house. $13,000. Unpaid for 9 years. You grow up watching your parents try to look like something they aren't. You file that information away. Far Rockaway High School. You are on the swim team. You lifeguard at Silver Point Beach Club on Long Island. You save every dollar. You watch the summer crowd. Rich kids. Easy money. You can read a room before you walk into it. You meet Ruth Alpern at school. Smart. Steady. She sees something in you that you haven't shown anyone else. You marry her in 1959. You are 21. You already know exactly what you want your life to look like. You finish at Hofstra University in 1960. Political science. You enroll briefly at Brooklyn Law School. You quit. You have $5,000 saved from lifeguarding, and your father-in-law Saul Alpern loans you $50,000. You are 22 years old. You hang a sign. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC. You look in the mirror and you see someone who deserves more. You've always seen that. The world just hasn't caught up yet. It's the early 1960s. Your firm is small. You're trading penny stocks. Low-priced shares the big Wall Street firms won't touch. You are not invited to those dinners. You are outside, face pressed against the glass. So you get clever. While everyone else is still doing everything by hand, you use computers. You are early. Very early. You build something fast, efficient, and cheap, and you start eating the big firm's lunch on execution speed and price. By the 1980s, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities handles more than 5% of all trades on the New York Stock Exchange. You built that from $5,000 and a borrowed desk. In 1990, they make you chairman of NASDAQ, the most powerful electronic stock exchange on earth. You shake the hands that matter. You sit at the head of the table, and then, quietly, you open a second division. Investment management, advisory. You barely advertise it. You take a few clients, wealthy friends, people from the Jewish community who trust you like family. You tell them you have a strategy. Split strike conversion. It sounds technical. It sounds brilliant. Nobody asks too many questions when the returns keep coming. The returns always keep coming. And here is what nobody knows yet, not even Ruth. You are not investing their money. You never were. You're not sure exactly when the lie begins. Maybe it was always there, quiet and patient, waiting. What you know is this: it is easier than you expected. You take the client's money. Instead of investing it, you deposit it into a single Chase Manhattan bank account, Number 703. You invent trades. You print account statements showing gains that never happened. Beautiful letterhead. Perfect numbers. Clients read them. They smile. They reinvest. Nobody checks. The SEC exists. Regulators exist. But you are Bernie Madoff. You sit on advisory committees. You have lunch with the people who are supposed to watch you. Your hands don't shake. You close the laptop. You open it again. The money is still there. It was that easy. And that is the most dangerous thought you have ever had. Because now you understand something. The scheme doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be trusted. And you have spent 30 years building trust like other men build fortunes. Fast forward. It's the 1990s. You are moving. The money comes in and never gets invested. You pay old clients with new clients' cash. You print fake trade confirmations. You show everyone a perfect 45-degree angle on their statements. Steady returns. Every quarter, every year, in every market. Rain or shine. Bull or bear. Impossible returns attract desperate money. Hedge funds come, feeder funds, wealthy families from Palm Beach country clubs, Jewish charities, pension funds. The word spreads through dinner parties and synagogues. You have to get into Madoff's fund. He doesn't take just anyone. You turn people away, just enough, just often enough, so that getting in feels like an honor. Carl Shapiro, the clothing entrepreneur, gives you hundreds of millions. His trust is absolute. Elie Wiesel, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Holocaust survivor, gives you $15.2 million from his Foundation for Humanity. He calls you his friend. He tells Oprah he trusts you with everything. Kevin Bacon, John Malkovich, Steven Spielberg's Foundation, the owners of the New York Mets, thousands of retirees, thousands of charities, universities, pension funds. You buy an apartment in Manhattan, a house in Palm Beach, a villa in Cap d'Antibes, France, 2 yachts, one named Bull, one named Lucky. The irony doesn't register. You wear suits that cost more than your father made in 6 months. Restaurants know your name before you walk in. You give to charities. You appear at galas. Cameras follow you. The fake account balances have now reached $65 billion on paper. You have not invested a single dollar of it. You tell yourself, 1 more year. Just 1 more year. You've told yourself that 19 times now. It's 1999. A man named Harry Markopolos is sitting at a desk in Boston. His boss asks him to replicate Madoff's strategy. He looks at your numbers for 5 minutes. Then he looks again. He builds a mathematical model. It takes 4 hours. The conclusion takes 5 seconds. It is mathematically impossible. Markopolos files a complaint with the SEC in 1999. They ignore it. 2001, ignored. 2005, he sends an 18-page document titled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." The SEC opens an investigation, then closes it, because you are Bernie Madoff. And Bernie Madoff doesn't do this. You find out someone is asking questions. Your heart does a specific thing, not stopping, just skipping, like a scratch on a record. You answer the SEC's questions smoothly. You wear the right tie. You say the right words. They leave. You sit alone in your office on the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Midtown, the secret floor, the floor with the invented records, the floor no one is supposed to find. You sit there for a long time. You start checking locks twice. Your phone rings at 2 a.m. Wrong number. You don't sleep for 3 days. Your sons Mark and Andrew work upstairs on the real trading floors. They don't know. You have made sure of that. The 17th floor is locked, kept separate. You tell yourself it's protection. You know it's a wall between the life you're living and the sons you're destroying. Ruth doesn't ask where the money comes from anymore. She used to. The silence is heavier than the questions ever were. September 2008. The world is ending. Lehman Brothers collapses. The stock market falls off a cliff. Every hedge fund, every institutional investor, every nervous retiree wants their money out. Now. By December, more than $12 billion in redemption requests are sitting on your desk. You don't have $12 billion. You never had $12 billion. You call everyone, old friends, business contacts. Carl Shapiro wires you hundreds of millions more. Not enough. Nothing is enough. The weight of $65 billion in invented money is falling, and you are standing underneath it. On December 9th, 2008, you call your sons into your Manhattan apartment. You tell them it is all a lie. The investment business, the returns, the accounts, all of it. One big lie. Decades. Almost your whole adult life. Your sons, Mark, 44, and Andrew, 45, stand in your living room and look at you like they have never seen you before. They probably haven't. They call a lawyer that night. The lawyer calls the FBI. December 11th, 2008. 7 a.m. 2 FBI agents knock on your apartment door. You are wearing the same suit you wore to a charity dinner 3 days ago. You know before you see the badges. You let them in. You sit down. You confess, completely, freely, for about an hour. You tell them the whole story. You say you expected to be arrested. You say you want it to be over. The handcuffs are colder than you expected. That is the detail that stays with you. Everything else has been slow motion. But the metal is cold and real, and it is the first real thing you have felt in years. In March 2009, you plead guilty to 11 federal felonies: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, perjury. On June 29, 2009, Judge Denny Chin sentences you to 150 years. You do the math before he finishes speaking. In the gallery, a woman is crying. You don't recognize her, but she was your client. She gave you her retirement. She has nothing now. You have a sentence. She has nothing. You don't turn around. On December 11th, 2010, the exact second anniversary of his arrest, your son Mark is found dead in his Manhattan apartment. He hanged himself. He was 46. Your son Andrew dies of cancer in 2014. He is 48. You file for compassionate release in 2020. The judge denies it. You die on April 14th, 2021. In the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, chronic kidney failure. You are 82 years old. They cremate you. The location of your ashes is private. Irving Picard, the trustee assigned to recover your client's money, has clawed back roughly $14.4 billion of an estimated $17 billion in real cash losses. Thousands of families still carry the rest. Retirees who cannot retire. Charities that closed. A Holocaust survivor who called you God. One persistent man in Boston named Harry Markopolos knew in 1999. He told the SEC 5 separate times. No one listened, because you were Bernie Madoff, and that was always the entire scheme. Not the math, not the accounts, just the name. That was your life. Every statement mailed to someone who trusted you completely. Every charity dinner where you smiled in the photographs. Every quiet lie that built the one after it. And here's the question that should keep you up tonight. At which exact moment would you have stopped? When you printed the first fake statement? When Elie Wiesel shook your hand? Or would you have kept going, the same way he did? Just one more year. Just until the real trades started working? Tell me in the comments. See you in the next one.